Hi, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. Glad to be back with you tonight. We're continuing to read in our book, By the Shores of Silver Lake by Laura Ingalls Wilder. This one's titled, it's chapter 10, The Wonderful Afternoon. Well, let's see what was so wonderful about it. Early every morning while Laura washed the breakfast dishes, she could look through the open doors and see the men leaving the boarding shanty and going to the thatched stable for their horses. Then there was a rattling of harnesses and confusion of talking and shouts, and the men and the teams went out to the job, leaving quietness behind them. All the days went by, one like another. On Mondays, Laura helped Ma do the washing and bring in the clean, scented clothes that dried quickly in the wind and the sunshine. On Tuesdays, she sprinkled them and helped Ma iron them. Now, you might not know what ironing even is, because nowadays we don't really iron our clothes, at least not very often, because the fabric, which is what the clothes is made of, the material that we have now, doesn't set wrinkles bad. But back in the day, let me tell you, you'd get it clothes, whether it was hanging up or in your dryer, and it would be wrinkled, very wrinkled, because that's just how it was. And so you would get this iron. Now in these days, theirs was just a piece of metal with a handle. It was shaped, let me see if I can show you, almost like your hand. And they would put that on a stove and it would get hot. And then they would put the clothes on some sort of board and they would run that hot iron, and that would take the wrinkles right out. Nowadays, well, at least when I was still ironing, there were electric ones you just plugged in and you could iron. I think those were easier. So that's what an iron was. On Wednesdays, she did her task of mending and sewing that she did not like to do. Mary was learning to sew without seeing. Her sensitive fingers could hem nicely, and she could sew quilt patches if the colors were matched for her. At noon, the camp was noisy again, with all the teams and men coming in for dinner. That's what we call lunch. Then Pa came from the store, and they all ate in the little shanty with the wind blowing against it and the wide prairie outside the door. Softly colored in all the shades from dark brown to russet and tan, the prairie rolled in gentle swells to the far edge of the sky. The winds were blowing colder at night now. More and more wild birds were flying southward, and Pa said that winter would be not long in the coming. But Laura did not think about winter. She wanted to know where the men were working and how they made the railroad grade. Every morning, my thing's slipping. Every morning they went out, and at noon and at night they came back. But all she saw of working was a smudge of dust that came up from the tawny prairie in the west. She wanted to see the men build the railroad. Aunt Dorca moved into camp one day, and she brought 2 cows. She said, "I brought her milk on the hoof, Charles. It's the only way to get any out here where there aren't any farms." One of the cows was for Pa. She was a pretty, bright red cow named Elna. Pa untied her from the back of Aunt Dorca's wagon and handed the halter rope to Laura. "Here, Laura," said, "you're old enough to take care of her. Take her out where the grass is good, and be sure to drive down the picket line good and firm." Picket line, they would put a stick, and they would pound that into the ground with the rope that held the cow, so the cow couldn't just go wandering off wherever it went. Laura and Lena picketed the cows not far apart in good grass. Every morning and every evening they met to take care of the cows. They led them to drink from the lake and moved the picket pens to fresh grass. Then they did the milking, and while they milked, they sang. Lena knew many new songs, and Laura learned them quickly. Together, while the milk streamed into the bright tin pails, they sang. Now I'm going to try to sing these. A life on the ocean wave, a home on the rolling deep. The pollywogs wag their tails, and tears roll down their cheeks. Sometimes Lena sang softly, and so did Laura. Oh, I wouldn't marry a farmer. He's always in the dirt. I'd rather marry a railroad man who wears a striped shirt. But Lena liked the waltz songs best. She loved the broom song, though they had to sing broom so many times to make the tune swing. Let's see if I can do it. Buy a broom, buy a broom, broom. Buy a broom, broom, buy a broom, broom. Will you buy this wandering barbarian a broom to brush off the insects that come to annoy you? You'll find it quite useful by day and by night. I didn't do too good, but that's okay. The cows stood quiet, chewing their cuds. Do you know what that means? Cows have more than one stomach. And so they will eat the grass or hay, whatever they're eating, grain maybe, and they will chew it up. And then they will swallow it, and it will go into the first stomach. I think they have 4 stomachs. And then after a while, you'll see a cow lay down. And when the cow lays down, that was in the first stomach comes back up and it chews it again. And then it goes back down to the second stomach. And it keeps doing that till it hits the 4th stomach. That's really different than us. And I would be really grossed out if I had to keep chewing mine. But for a cow, it's natural. The cows stood quiet, chewing their cuds as though they were listening to the singing until the milking was done. Then, with the pails of warm, sweet-smelling milk, Laura and Lena walked back towards the shanties. In the mornings, the men were coming out of the bunkhouse, washing in the basins on the bench by the door and combing their hair. And the sun was rising over Silver Lake. In the evenings, the sky flamed with red and purple and gold. The sun had set, and the teams and men were coming in. Dark along the dusty road they had worn on the prairie, and they were singing. Then, quickly, Lena hurried to Aunt Dorca's shanty and Laura to Ma's, because they must strain the milk before the cream began to rise and help get supper. Lena had so much work to do, helping Aunt Dorca and the cousin Louisa, that she had no time to play. And Laura, though she did not work so hard, was busy enough. So they hardly ever met except at milking time. If Pa hadn't put our black ponies to work on that grade, Lena said one day, you know what I'd do? No, what? Laura asked. Well, if I could get away, and if we had ponies to ride, we'd go see the men working, said Lena. Don't you want to? Yes, I want to, Laura said. She did not have to decide whether or not she would disobey Pa, because they couldn't do it anyway. Suddenly, one day at dinner, Pa set down his teacup, wiped his mustache, and said, You ask too many questions, Flutterbudget. Put on your bonnet and come on up to the store along about 2 o'clock. I'll take you out and let you see for yourself. Oh, Pa! Laura cried out. There, Laura, don't get so excited, Ma said quietly. Laura knew she should not shout. She kept her voice low. Pa, can Lena go too? We'll have to decide about that later, said Ma. After Pa had gone back to the store, Ma talked seriously to Laura. She said she wanted her girls to know how to behave and to speak nicely in low voices and have gentle manners and be ladies. They'd always lived in wild, rough places except for a little while on Plum Creek, and now they were at a rough railroad camp, and it would be some time before this country was civilized. Until then, Ma thought it best that they keep themselves to themselves. She wanted Laura to stay away from the camp and not get acquainted with any of the rough men there. It would be all right for her to go quietly with Pa to see them work this once, but she must be well behaved and ladylike, and remember that a lady never did anything that could attract attention. Try to get people to check you out, see what you're like. Yes, Ma, Laura said. And Laura, I do not want you to take Lena, said Ma. Lena is a good, capable girl, but she's boisterous, that means loud. And Dorca has not curbed her as much as she might. If you must go where those rough men are, working in the dirt, then you go quietly with your pa and come back quietly and say no more about it. Yes, Ma, Laura said, but what, Laura? Ma asked. Nothing, said Laura. I don't know why you want to go anyway, Ma, Mary wondered. It's much nicer here in the shanty or taking a little walk by the lake. I just want to. I want to see them building a railroad, Laura said. She tied on her sunbonnet when she set out and resolved to keep it tied on. That means she decided that that's what she was going to do. Pa was alone at the store. He put on his broad-brimmed hat and padlocked the door, and they went out to the prairie together. At that time of the day, when there was no shadows, the prairie looked level, but it was not. In a few minutes, the swells, the little, where it would rise a little bit and go down a little bit, hid the shanties. And on the grassy land, there was nothing to be seen but the dusty track of the road and the railroad grade beside it. Against the sky ahead rose a smudge of dust, blowing away on the wind. Pa held onto his hat and Laura bent her head in the flapping sunbonnet, and they trudged together for some time. Then Pa stopped and said, "There you are, Half Pint." They were standing on a little rise of ground. Before them, the railroad grade ended bluntly, just stopped. In front of it, men with teams and plows were plowing onward towards the west, breaking the wide strip of prairie sod. Do they do it with plows? Laura asked. It seemed strange to her to think of men with plows when ahead in this country that had never been plowed before to build a railroad. And scrapers, said Pa. Now watch, Laura. Between the plowing and the blunt edge of the grade, teams and men were going slowly around in a circle, over the end of the grade and back to the cross of plowed strip. The teams were pulling wide, deep shovels. These were the scrapers. Instead of one long shovel handle, each scraper had two short handles, and a strong half hoop of steel curved from one side of the scraper to the other side. The team was hitched to this curve of steel. When a man in his team came to the plowed land, another man took hold of the scraper handles and held them just high enough to thrust the round shovel point into the loose earth of the plowed ground while the team went on and the earth filled the scraper. I'm going to kind of just show you this picture. Let's see if I can do it. Then he let go of the handles and the full scraper sat level on the ground. The horses pulled on it up the side of the grade. On the grade's blunt end, the men who drove the team caught hold of the scraper's handles and tipped the whole scraper over in a somersault inside the curving steel that the horses were hitched to. All the dirt was scraped right there, while the team drew the empty scraper down the grade and on around the circle to the plowed land again. There, the other men caught hold of the handles and held them just high enough to thrust the round shovel point into the loose earth until the scraper was filled again. And on the circle it came sliding behind the team up the steep grade and somersaulted over again. Team after team came around the circle, scraper after scraper tipped. The teams never stopped coming. The scraper never stopped filling and tipping. As the loose soil was scraped from the plowed land, the curve widened out so the scrapers passed over freshly plowed ground again, while the plowed teams came back and plowed again the ground that had been scraped. So they're making it deeper down. It all goes like clockwork, said Pa. See, no one stands still, no one hurries. When one scraper is filled, another is on the spot to take its place, and the scraper holder is there to grab the handles and fill it. The scrapers never have to wait for the plows, and the plows just go far ahead before they come back to plow again the ground that has been scraped. They are doing great work. Fred is a good boss. Fred stood at the dump watching the teams and scrapers circling and the plows coming around again the circle and moving out ahead again. He watched the dumping of the scrapers and the dirt rolling down. With a nod or a word, he told each driver when to dump his scraper so that the grade would be even and straight and level. That's very important for railroad tracks, or even for roads that we drive on now. For every 6 teams, one man did nothing but stand and watch. If a team slowed, he spoke to the driver and he drove faster. If a team went too fast, he spoke to that driver, and that driver held his horses back. The teams must be spaced evenly. While they kept this going steadily around the circle, over the plowed land, and to the grade, and over it, and back to the plowed ground again. 30 teams, 30 scrapers, and all 4 horse teams and plows and all the drivers and the scraper holders, they were going round and round in their places and all moving in time. They were open prairie, just like the works of a clock, as Pa had said. And on the prowl of the new railroad grade in the dust, Fred the boss kept it all going. Laura would never tire of watching that, but farther west there was more to see. Pa said, "Come along, Half Pint, and see how they make a cut and a fill." Laura walked with Pa along the wagon track where the crushed dead grass lay like broken hay in the dust where the wagon wheels had passed. Further to the west, beyond the little rise of the prairie, More men were building another piece of railroad grade in a little dip. Beyond the rise, they were making a fill, and further on, they were making a cut through higher ground. So where the ground went down, they had to fill that part so it would come up even. Where the ground was high, they had to dig that down so it would be even. You see, Laura, Pa said, where the ground is low, they make the grade higher. Where the ground is high, they cut through to make the grade level. A railroad bed has to be level as it can be for the trains to run on. Why, Pa? Laura asked. Why can't trains just run over the prairie swells? There were no real hills, and it seemed a waste of hard work to cut through all the little rises and fill all the little hollows just to make the rail bed level. No, it saves work later on, Pa said. You ought to be able to see that, Laura, without being told. Laura could see that a level road would save work for the horses. But a locomotive, that's what they called a train, was an iron horse. It never got tired. Yes, but it burns coal, said Pa. Coal has to be mined, and that's work. An engine burns less coal running on level than it does going up and down the grades. So, you see, it takes more work and costs more money now to make a level grade. But later on, it'll be saving work and money. So, they'll be used for building something else. What, Pa? What else would they build? Laura asked. More railroads, said Pa. I wouldn't wonder if you'd live to see a time, Laura, when pretty nearly everybody rides on railroads and there hardly will be a covered wagon left. Laura could not imagine a country with so many railroads, nor one so rich that nearly everybody could ride on trains. But she did not really try to imagine it now, because they'd come to the high ground where they could see the men working at the cut of the fill. Right across the prairie swell where the trains would run, the teams with plows and teams with scrapers were cutting a wide ditch. Back and forth went the teams pulling the plows, and round went the teams hauling the scrapers, all steadily moving in time with each other. But here the scrapers did not go in a circle. They went in a long, narrow loop into the cut and out again at one end. And at the other end, they went over to the dump. The dump was a deep ditch at the end of the cut and crossways to it. Heavy timbers, that's big pieces of wood, shored up the sides of this ditch. So they're going to hold up the ground that's going in it. It's making a wall. And make a flat platform over the top of it. There was a hole in the middle of this platform, and the earth had been graded high on each side of the ditch to make the level with the platform. Out of the cut came the teams, steadily walking one behind another, pulling the loaded scrapers. They went up the grade to the top of the dump, and they went across the platform. They passed over the hole, one horse walking on each side of it, while into the hole the driver dumped the scraper load of dirt. Going steadily on, down the steep grade and around, they went back to the cut and filled those scrapers again. All the time, a circle of wagons was moving through the dump under the hole in the platform. Every time a scraper dumped its load, a wagon was under the hole to catch the dirt. Each wagon waited until 5 scraper loads had poured down into it. Then it moved on, and the wagon behind it moved under the hole, and it waited for its turn. The wagon of circles came out of the dump and curved back to climb over the edge of the high railroad grade that was coming towards the cut. Every wagon, as it passed over the grade, dumped its dirt and made the grade that much longer. The wagons had no wagon boxes. They were only platforms of heavy planks. To dump the dirt, the teamster turned those planks over one at a time. Wow, that'd be hard. Then he drove onward down the hill to the fill and back to the endless circle, through to the dump, so he could be loaded again. Dust blew from the plows and the scrapers, and from the dump at the end of the hill. A great cloud of dust rose all the time, up over the sweating men and the sweating horses. The men's faces and arms were black with sunburn and dust. Their blue and gray shirts were streaked with sweat and dust. And the horses' manes and tails and hair were full of dust, and their flanks, that's their sides, were caked with muddy sweat. They all went on steadily and evenly, circling in the cut and out while the plows went back and forth. They never miss once, Laura marveled. Every time a scraper dumps, there's a wagon underneath to catch the dirt. That's the boss's job, Pa said. He makes them keep time, just like they were playing a tune. Watch the boss and you'll see how it's done. It's pretty work. On the rise above the cut and on the end of the fill and along the circles, the bosses stood. They watched the men and the teams and kept them moving in time. Here they slowed one team a little. There they hurried another. No one stopped and waited. No one was late at his place. Laura heard the boss call out from the top of the cut, "Boys, move along a little faster." You see, Pa said, it's nearly quitting time, and they've all slowed down a bit. They can't put that over on a good boss, though. The whole afternoon had gone while Pa and Laura watched those circles moving, making the railroad grade. It was time to go back to the store and to the shanty. Laura took one long last look and had to go. On the way, Pa showed her the figures painted on the grade stakes that were driven into the ground in a straight line where the railroad grade would be. The surveyors had driven those stakes. The figures told the graders how high to build the grade on low ground and how deep to make the cuts on high ground. The surveyors had measured it all and figured the exact grade before anything else was done. First, someone had thought of a railroad. Then the surveyors had come out to that empty country, and they marked and measured the railroad that was not even there yet. It was only a railroad that someone had thought of. Then all the plowsmen came to tear up the prairie grass, and the scraper men to dig up the dirt, and the teamsters with their wagons to haul it. And all of them said they were working on the railroad, but still the railroad wasn't there. Nothing was there yet but cuts through the prairie swells, pieces of railroad grade that were really only narrow, short ridges of earth, all pointing westward towards the enormous grassy land. When the grade's finished, Pa said, the shovelmen will come along with hand shovels, and they'll smooth the sides of the grade by hand and level it up on the top. And then they'll lay the rails? Laura asked. Don't jump ahead so fast, Flutterbudget. Pa laughed at her. The railroad ties have got to be shipped out here and laid before it's time for the rails. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither's a railroad or anything else worth having. The sun was so low now that each prairie swell began to have its own little shadow lying eastward, and out the large pale sky of flocks and ducks, the long wedges of geese were sliding down towards Silver Lake to rest for the night. The clean wind was blowing with no dust in it now, and Laura let her sunbonnet slip down on her back so that she could feel the wind on her face and see the whole wide prairie. There was no railroad there now, but someday the long steel tracks would lie level in the fields, and through the cuts, and the trains would come roaring, steaming and smoking with speed. The tracks and the trains were not there now, but Laura could see them almost as if they were. Suddenly she asked Pa, "Pa, was that what made the very first railroad?" "What are you talking about?" Pa asked. "Are there railroads because people think of them first when they aren't there?" Pa thought a minute. "That's right," he said. "Yes, that's what makes things happen. People think of them first. If enough people think of a thing and work hard at it, I guess it's pretty nearly bound to happen. Wind and weather permitting, of course." "What's that house, Pa?" Laura asked. "What house?" Pa asked. "That house, the real house," Laura pointed. All this time she'd been meaning to ask Pa about the house standing by itself on the north shore of the lake, and she'd always forgotten. "Oh, that's the surveyor's house," Pa said. "Are they there now?" Laura asked. "They come and they go," said Pa. They had almost reached the store, and he went on, "Run along now home, Flutterbudget. I've got work to do in the books. Now you know how the railroad grade's made. Be sure to tell Mary about it." "Oh, I will, Pa," Laura promised. "I'll see it out loud for her. Every bit." She did her best, but Mary only said, "I don't really know, Laura, why you'd rather watch those rough men working in the dirt than stay here in the nice clean shanty. I finished another quilt patch while you've been idling." That means wasting time. But Laura was still seeing the movements of the men and the horses in such perfect time that she could almost sing the tune to which they worked. So she found that type of thing very interesting. How people make things. Now that was a big thing. Sometimes you might like to see how people make other things. Maybe how your mom or dad make a cake. Or how a grown-up makes a bed. There's all sorts of things that people do. I think it'd be fun to watch a person make a shoe. Well, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. I want to pray blessings on you and yours, in your house, out of your house, in the day and in the night. Whatever you do, keep dreaming. Good night and God bless you.